Your brain is not finished. And I do not mean that as an insult. I mean it as the single most empowering scientific fact that modern neuroscience has established about the human mind. Because what it means is that the version of your brain you are using right now, with its current limitations, its current fears, its current ceiling on what feels possible and what feels permanently beyond you, is not the final version, is not the fixed version, is not the version you are sentenced to for the remainder of your life, regardless of what you do or don't do. It is the current version, shaped by your history, by your environment, by the experiences and inputs and habits you have accumulated up to this point, and it is capable of being deliberately, systematically, and permanently reshaped by the experiences and inputs and habits you choose from this point forward, which is the meaning of neuroplasticity, which is the scientific foundation of everything we are going to discuss today, and which is the reason that training your brain for success is not a metaphor or a motivational concept, but a literal, biological, neurologically grounded possibility that is available to every human being, regardless of their starting point, their history, or what they have been told about the fixed nature of their intelligence, their potential, or their capacity for change. Let's begin with what neuroplasticity actually means at the cellular level, because understanding the mechanism is what separates this conversation from generic motivational content and makes it genuinely actionable in a way that produces real behavioral and cognitive change rather than temporary inspiration that fades by the weekend. Neuroplasticity is the brain's capacity to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections in response to experience, to strengthen frequently used neural pathways and weaken infrequently used ones, to build new synaptic connections between neurons that fire together repeatedly, and to physically alter the structure, density, and connectivity of brain regions in response to the specific demands placed upon them. Donald Hebb's foundational principle, neurons that fire together wire together, captures the essential mechanism. Every time you think a thought, practice a skill, adopt a behavior, or engage in a specific kind of mental activity, you are activating a specific neural pathway, and every activation of that pathway makes it marginally easier to activate again in the future, marginally faster, marginally more automatic, marginally more likely to become the default response to the relevant stimulus. This means that your current habits of thinking, your tendency toward optimism or pessimism, your default response to failure, your capacity for focused attention, your relationship with discomfort, your pattern of self-talk, are not personality traits fixed at birth, but trained neural patterns that have been strengthened through repetition into the apparent naturalness of default behavior, and that they can, through the deliberate introduction of new and different repetitions, be gradually but genuinely replaced with patterns that serve your goals rather than undermine them. Now, let's talk about the first and most foundational brain training practice for success. And that is the deliberate cultivation of what neuroscientists call a challenge growth response, which is the trained tendency to interpret cognitively or emotionally demanding situations as opportunities for neural development rather than as threats to be avoided. Research by Stanford neuroscientist Andrew Huberman and his colleagues on stress reappraisal demonstrates that the physiological stress response, the elevated heart rate, the heightened alertness, the mobilization of cognitive and physical resources that accompanies challenging situations, is neurologically identical whether it is experienced as threat or as excitement. and that the specific meaning the brain assigns to those physiological signals is not determined by the signals themselves, but by the cognitive appraisal the individual applies to them, which means it is trainable. People who have been trained to interpret the physiological arousal of challenge as excitement and engagement rather than fear and threat, through the simple, repeated practice of reframing the internal narrative around challenging situations, demonstrate measurably better performance under pressure, greater creative problem-solving capacity, and more robust long-term learning from difficult experiences, because the challenge growth interpretation keeps the prefrontal cortex engaged and analytically active, while the threat interpretation triggers the amygdala's defensive processing, which narrows cognitive field and reduces the quality of thinking precisely when the highest quality thinking is needed. Training this response is not complicated. It is the deliberate, repeated practice of asking in moments of challenge and discomfort, what is my brain learning right now, rather than how do I escape this situation? And the repetition of that reframe across hundreds and eventually thousands of challenging moments builds a neural pathway that makes it the increasingly automatic and increasingly effortless default response to difficulty. Let's now examine the neuroscience of self-talk. Because the internal narrative you run about yourself, your capabilities, and your relationship to success is not just a psychological experience, it is a neurological one with specific and measurable effects on brain chemistry, prefrontal cortex activation, and the quality of cognitive and behavioral output it produces. Research by Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan on what he calls distanced self-talk, specifically the practice of referring to yourself in the third person or by name, rather than in the first person when processing challenging situations and setting intentions, demonstrates that this simple linguistic shift activates a qualitatively different neural processing mode, one that is less emotionally reactive, more analytically sophisticated, and more aligned with the kind of wise, perspective-taking cognitive engagement that consistently produces better decisions, better emotional regulation, and better performance outcomes. The brain that says, I am terrible at this and I always fail, is activating the same threat processing neural circuitry that a physical danger activates, flooding the system with cortisol, narrowing attention, and reducing the cognitive bandwidth available for the creative problem solving that success in any domain requires. The brain that says, this person is finding this challenging right now, what do they know about how to move forward, is activating the perspective-taking circuitry of the medial prefrontal cortex, maintaining emotional distance from the immediate difficulty and generating the kind of calm, strategic cognitive engagement that produces genuine learning and genuine progress. Training your self-talk is training your brain, not metaphorically but literally, at the level of neural pathway activation and synaptic strengthening. And the returns on that training compound across every domain of your life simultaneously, because the self-talk neural pattern, once built, activates automatically in every situation where self-assessment is required. Now let's discuss the role of visualization in brain training, because the neuroscience here is one of the most remarkable and most practically empowering findings in all of cognitive neuroscience, and it is frequently dismissed as mystical or unscientific by people who have not examined the actual research, which demonstrates something genuinely extraordinary. The brain cannot fully distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one at the level of neural activation. Studies using neuroimaging technology demonstrate that when a person vividly visualizes performing a specific action, a basketball player imagining a free throw, a musician imagining a performance, an entrepreneur imagining a successful pitch, the motor cortex, the sensory processing regions, and the emotional circuits that would activate during the actual performance activate during the visualization as well, which means that high-quality mental rehearsal literally builds the neural infrastructure for the real performance, produces genuine skill development without any physical practice, and creates the neurological familiarity with success that reduces anxiety and increases competence in real-world execution. Olympic athletes have known this intuitively for decades. Sports psychology has incorporated visualization as a standard performance enhancement tool since the 1970s. But the neuroscience now explains precisely why it works and precisely what makes it effective, which is the specificity and vividness of the imagined experience, the emotional engagement the visualization produces, and the consistent, repeated practice that builds the relevant neural pathways with the same progressive strengthening that physical practice produces. Visualizing your success is not wishful thinking. It is neural pre-building, the deliberate construction of the cognitive infrastructure your future performance will run on. Let's now examine the brain training practice that has the strongest and most consistent empirical support across the widest range of success-relevant outcomes. And that is the practice of deliberate, regular, skill-edge training, which is the specific form of practice that Anders Ericsson's 4 decades of research on expert performance identified as the causal mechanism behind all forms of genuine expertise. Deliberate practice is not just practicing. It is practicing at the precise boundary of your current capability, in the specific zone where the task is challenging enough to require your full cognitive engagement, but not so challenging as to produce overwhelming performance anxiety, with immediate feedback on your performance, and with the explicit intention of identifying and correcting specific weaknesses rather than rehearsing existing strengths. This is the zone of maximum neuroplasticity, the specific performance context in which myelin production is maximized, in which new neural pathways are most actively formed, and in which existing pathways are most effectively restructured. And it is the zone that most people, in most practice sessions in most domains, consistently avoid, because it is the zone of maximum discomfort, the zone where the gap between your current capability and your desired capability is most viscerally and uncomfortably present. Training your brain for success requires the deliberate, consistent, patient seeking of this zone, not the comfortable rehearsal of what you already know, not the performance of skills already mastered, not the practice that feels smooth and confident and self-reassuring, but the practice that feels difficult and uncertain and slightly humiliating, the practice that produces errors you can learn from, the practice that builds the neural infrastructure of future capability precisely because it is demanding in ways that comfortable practice is not. Now, let's address the brain training practice that most people intellectually understand and most consistently under-implement. And that is the management of sleep as the primary neural consolidation and restoration mechanism that makes every other brain training practice actually work. Matthew Walker's research at UC Berkeley on sleep and the brain establishes beyond any reasonable scientific doubt that sleep is not a passive state of neural inactivity, but an active, extraordinarily complex process of memory consolidation, synaptic pruning, emotional processing, neurochemical restoration, and structural brain maintenance that is the literal mechanism by which the learning of the day is converted into the capability of tomorrow. Every skill you practiced, every insight you had, every neural pathway you activated during the waking hours is consolidated, strengthened, organized, integrated with existing knowledge structures during the specific sleep phases that follow. And without that consolidation, the neural plasticity that practice and learning produce is not retained in the lasting, structural way that genuine skill development requires. Sleeping less to have more time to practice is not a productivity strategy. It is a neural consolidation sabotage strategy, one that trades the short-term experience of more practice time for the long-term reality of less actual skill development, because the practice without the sleep is the stimulus without the adaptation, the workout without the recovery, the input without the processing that converts it from experience into capability. And finally, the most important brain training truth that this entire video has been building toward, the truth that integrates every practice we have discussed into a single coherent psychological and neurological framework. Training your brain for success is not a project you complete. It is an identity you build, one neural pathway at a time, one repeated choice at a time, one small, deliberate practice at a time, across the entire span of a life that is defined not by the capabilities you were born with, but by the capabilities you chose, consistently and imperfectly and courageously to build. The brain you have today is the product of everything you have practiced up to now. Every thought pattern you have repeated, every behavior you have defaulted to, every challenge you have approached or avoided, every story you have told yourself about who you are and what you are capable of, and the brain you will have in 5 years is being built right now, in this moment, by the choices you are making about what to practice, what to think, what to do with the discomfort of growth, and what identity to cast votes for with your daily behavior. The most successful people in every domain are not the people who were born with the best brains. They are the people who understood earlier and more completely than those around them that the brain is a tool that can be trained, that training it is the highest leverage investment available to any human being, and that the return on that investment, compounded across years and decades of deliberate, consistent, neurologically informed practice, is not just success in the conventional sense, but the specific and irreplaceable satisfaction of becoming, through your own chosen effort, genuinely and measurably more capable than you were before, which is the deepest meaning of success that the human brain has ever been designed to pursue. Subscribe for more mind secrets. Mind.